You're listening to the new WCEG Network on WCEG Talk Radio.com. Click the Livestream tab or watch us live on your smart TV, YouTube, WCEG Network. I'm Dr. Wanzo, your show host of Mind Matters for the next 1 hour, and we are the worldwide community empowerment group where we speak life into the community. Please like us on Facebook. Please follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at WCEG_talk_radio and at WCEG. Last but not least, the topics and opinions are those of the show hosts and guests and not WCEG Network. Thank you for your continued support. Good evening again. Welcome to Mind Matters, where we discuss relevant mental health issues. I'm your host, Dr. Wanzo. I am a psychiatrist, and I've been practicing in Atlanta for the past 30 years. Our co-host is Norman Carter Jr. He's a retired Philadelphia police corporal. He's also written a book that's very relevant to our times. The book is entitled The Long Blue Walk, My Journey as a Philly Cop. It is available on Amazon, so please purchase it. It's very timely. He also hosts his own show on WCEG called Issues and Answers. Tune in on Mondays at 4 p.m. Hi, Norm.
Hello, how are you, doctor?
Great, great. So great to be back. This is our first show of the fall season, and we are delighted to be back so we can speak more life into the community.
Absolutely.
So our topic this evening is, why do I feel suicidal? This month, September, is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. Earlier this month, the chief financial officer, who was 52, of Bed Bath & Beyond, jumped to his death from the 18th floor balcony of his Manhattan high-rise apartment. His wife witnessed him jump. The company is currently in financial turmoil. They're facing the layoff of 20% of their employees and on the verge of closing 150 stores. On August 23rd, the chief financial officer himself was named as a defendant in a pump and dump scheme to artificially inflate the price of the company's stock. So that's why we're still discussing suicide, because it's still happening. Suicide is a major public health concern. In 2019, suicide was the 10th leading cause of death overall in the United States, claiming the lives of 47,500 people. Suicide is always complicated and tragic, but it is often preventable. Knowing the warning signs for suicide and how to get help can save lives. What is suicide? Suicide is when people harm themselves with the goal of ending their life, and they die as a result. A suicide attempt is when people harm themselves with the goal of ending their life, but they do not die. A very important concept that I always like to stress is avoid using the term committing suicide, because that carries a negative connotation that we want to avoid. So Norm, any thoughts so far on suicide and the fact that it's something we're still having to talk about?
Well, I tell you, and we kind of brought up some of this before, but I was amazed. The CDC, because this is Suicide Awareness Month, the CDC has an extensive amount of information on their website, and just a little small snippet. We'll get into this a little bit deeper later, I'm sure. But in 2020, suicide was among the top 9 leading causes of death for people. It was the second leading cause of death from people ages, get this, 10 to 14 years of age and 25 to 34 years of age. 10 to 14, 25 to 34. We have a problem.
Repeat that again. Repeat those statistics again. So
in 2020, suicide was among the top 9 leading causes of death for people. The second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 14 and 25 to 34.
Wow.
And I on my program yesterday, I brought out the fact, well, it says in 2020, the suicide rate dropped from 2019. We only had 45,979 deaths in 20 from suicide. But out of that 45,979, there were almost 25,000 deaths committed with guns.
Yes.
So that's alarming.
It's very alarming. So we're going to talk about some of the risk factors and some of the warning signs, but something that I came across in doing my research last night is that there is now emerging a new risk factor for suicide, which is long COVID. So there was a gentleman named Scott Taylor who, in the article, it said he never got to move on from COVID-19. This 56-year-old who caught the disease in spring 2020 still had not recovered about 18 months later when he killed himself at his home near Dallas, having lost his health, his money, and his memory. This was a quotation that he quoted before he killed himself. "No one cares. No one wants to take the time to listen." He wrote that in his final text to a friend, speaking of the plight of millions of sufferers of long COVID, which is a disabling condition that can last for months and years after the infection. He went on to say, "I can hardly do laundry without complete exhaustion, pain, fatigue, pain all up and down my spine. My world is spinning dizzily. I have nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. It seems like I say stuff and I have no idea of what I'm saying." And he killed himself. There is no authoritative data on the frequency of suicide among people with long COVID, but several scientists, including the National Institutes of Health, they are beginning to study this to look at the potential link because of the evidence of increased cases of depression and suicide among people with long COVID. A number of deaths have ensued. One psychiatrist in New York said, "I am sure that long COVID is associated with suicidal thoughts, suicide attempts, suicide plans, and the risk of suicide death. We just don't have the epidemiological data yet." Long COVID is a complex medical condition that can be hard to diagnose, as it has a range of more than 200 symptoms, some of which can resemble other illnesses, from exhaustion, cognitive impairment to pain, fever, and heart palpitations. And I can just say this firsthand as one, I guess I am in the category of long COVID at this point because I had COVID in July and it's now September, and I still experience brain fog, fatigue, what else? Yeah, but brain fog and fatigue, those are the two main symptoms that I'm still experiencing. I have to take a nap every day. And it's hard for me, I have to write everything down and I'm very forgetful. So, and I know several other people who are still experiencing that. So it's a real thing.
Yeah, we just had a co-worker, my wife, who died just a couple of months ago. And she suffered from long-term COVID. And I, it's it's really sad that uh, that an irresponsible comments and behavior by a president of the United States resulted in millions and millions of people taking this COVID disease as a joke. And as a result, we're suffering for it. It's still with us. It's mutating, and it's mutating because enough people didn't take the right precautions, and the disease is able to adapt, but it adapts through people who don't take the vaccine. The virus wants to survive.
Yes.
It's fighting for survival, and it's going to do whatever it can to mask itself and mutate itself to ensure its survival. And you know, I hope I'm not being going too far, but it's like the people who years ago, many of whom were from Hollywood and got themselves on TV telling people not to take certain vaccines and not to get immunized because it caused autism, which wasn't true. And so now we have this fear of getting vaccines, and we have the diseases like monkeypox that's coming back, smallpox to a certain extent, chicken pox, all of these measles is coming back. And now we're stuck with COVID, long-term COVID.
And polio, polio's coming back.
Polio's back.
Yeah, polio's
Yes. And now we're having to face the fact that long-term COVID can lead people to suicide.
And there are many, many people. I see it in my practice, people who are dealing with the aftermaths of long COVID, not able to return to work, having to go out on disability. I mean, it is real. It is real.
And just to accentuate your point about the suicides, and I think it's important to bring this out. In 2020, an estimated 12.2 million adults seriously considered suicide. 3.2 million planned a suicide attempt, and 1.2 million attempted suicide.
Wow. And
we know that for sure 45,979 of those attempts resulted in death. It's horrendous, and all of us need to be concerned about it, because if we don't ourselves fall into that mode, there are people around us who are suffering and who are considering suicide.
Right. As far as the vaccine, I had the first 2 doses, and I had the second booster. I mean, the first booster. Haven't had the second booster yet, but now I understand that they have come out. The new booster that's available now is to deal with the subvariants. So I do plan to get that one. I think this I have to.
I've had mine.
Oh, so you got the new one?
I didn't get the new one, but I got my second booster in July.
So then are you able to get the new one that's just come out?
Well, I think you have to wait, because I think it's a 6-month wait, something like that. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that exactly. But once I'm eligible, I'm going to get it.
And I don't recall, did you ever contract COVID? Did you ever have it?
No.
Boy, you're one of the, because I think I forgot, it's a high percentage of the population that
right.
Had it, yeah. And so the woman that you mentioned that died, did she die like in the early stages of having COVID, or what happened?
Well, no. Well, she, as best I can remember, she contacted COVID, and her COVID was serious enough for her to be hospitalized. And she was hospitalized for about 3 months. She was intubated. During that hospitalization. She was released, but she still, a year later, was still suffering from the effects of long-term COVID.
Long COVID, yes.
And I guess, I don't know whether she had other contributing factors,
Mhm.
but definitely the long-term COVID contributed to her death.
So do you
And
know what
she was
the cause of her death was? Was it like pneumonia
no,
or? Yeah.
no, the family didn't put that out.
Wow.
Yeah, but
Mm.
yeah, but we do know that she was suffering the effects of long-term COVID
Mhm, mhm,
even after she was released,
mhm,
months and months after she was released. The brain fog and the
mhm, mhm,
lethargy.
mhm.
Um, yeah, she
Wow.
had all of that.
Wow.
So we're talking serious stuff here.
And the other thing is COVID can affect all organs of your body. I mean, I guess I mean,
Hmm.
I don't say this now, but I just found out from my cardiologist that it's also affected my heart. And I'm in the process of having some medical tests to evaluate it. So I'm in that process now, but he's saying that it has affected my heart as well. I know. Yeah. So,
I say the disease is no joke,
mhm,
and we
mhm.
want to keep you here.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
So
So,
how do we save people? How do we reach out?
well, I think it's important to know like what the risk factors are for suicide and the warning signs. So I'm going to go into what the risk factors for suicide so that if we're aware of
Mhm.
the risk factors and recognize the warning signs, and then we can reach out to help others. So suicide does not discriminate. People of all genders, ages, and ethnicities can be at risk. Suicidal behavior is complex and there is no single cause, but there are some risk factors that we can look at. So the main risk factors for suicide are depression or other mental disorders or substance use disorder. Some of the other mental disorders can be bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety disorders. So any number of other mental health disorders can be a risk factor for suicide. Chronic pain, people who are in chronic pain, that's a high risk for suicide. Prior history of suicide attempts is an indicator. A family history of any type of mental disorder or a family history of substance abuse, a family history of suicide, exposure to family violence, including physical or sexual abuse. Here's one that's very, very important, as Norm mentioned earlier, the presence of guns or firearms in the home. I read one study that if there's the presence of a gun in a home, a male is 8 times more likely to kill himself and a female 35 times more likely to kill herself. Another risk factor is having recently been released from prison or jail. In fact, the number one cause of death for people incarcerated is from suicide. When I worked at the jail, we had a number of successful suicides where they killed themselves by taking the sheet and putting it on the door and then just dropping down and killing themselves with the sheet around their necks. We had a number of people who did that while I worked in the jail. Another risk factor is being exposed directly or indirectly to others' suicidal behavior, such as that of a family member, peers, or even celebrities. So that's called like the contagion factor. Often when celebrities kill themselves, then other people will attempt that as well. Most people who have risk factors will not attempt suicide. And it's really difficult to tell who will act on suicidal thoughts. Although risk factors for suicide are important to keep in mind, someone who is showing warning signs of suicide may be at a higher risk for danger and need immediate attention. Stressful life events, such as the loss of a loved one, legal troubles, financial difficulties, as the CFO of Bed Bath & Beyond was experiencing, and interpersonal stressors such as shame, harassment, and bullying, discrimination, relationship problems may contribute to suicide risk, especially when they occur along with other suicide risk factors. What are the warning signs? There are warning signs that someone may be at immediate risk for attempting suicide. And these warning signs are talking about wanting to die or wanting to kill themselves, talking about feeling empty or hopeless or having no reason to live, talking about feeling trapped or feeling that there are no solutions. This is really important. Feeling unbearable emotional or physical pain. Talking about being a burden to others. Withdrawing from family and friends. Giving away possessions. So please note, if someone is giving away their cherished, whatever it is, then be aware. Saying goodbye to friends and family. Putting affairs in order, such as making a will. Taking great risks that could lead to death, such as driving extremely fast. Talking or thinking about death often. Displaying extreme mood swings, suddenly changing from very sad to very happy. Making a plan or looking for ways to kill themselves, such as searching for lethal methods online, stockpiling pills, or buying a gun. I remember years ago, I don't know if it's still available, but there were a number of people who would buy this book called Final Exit that detailed ways to kill themselves, and they would outline different ways. So I don't know if that's still available, but a number of people used that book in the past. Other warning signs include talking about feeling guilt or shame, using alcohol or drugs. People are then often trying to self-medicate the pain that they're experiencing. Acting very anxious or agitated. A change in sleeping or eating habits, either sleeping all the time or not sleeping at all, eating all the time or not eating at all, showing rage or talking about taking revenge. It's important to note, suicide is not a normal response to stress. Suicidal thoughts or actions are a sign of extreme distress and should not be ignored. If these warning signs apply to you or someone you know, get help as soon as possible, particularly if the behavior is new or has increased recently. Ms. Norm, any thoughts?
I tell you, you've covered so much there, and the chronic pain reminds me of if you've ever been close to cancer patients. And I think of one police inspector from Philadelphia who contracted brain cancer. And the discomfort and the pain got to the point where he actually took a gun and killed himself.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. And if you've ever been around cancer patients on an intimate level, you know that at some point that the those who are terminal, that the even the morphine has no effect on the pain,
Mm,
and you almost have people begging for the release, the release through death
mm,
uh, of that, and that's where it's important to have close and caring family members or close associates around people during that time,
mm,
because it's just a horrible thing. Uh, that pain, incessant day and night pain, that's excruciating, and there's nothing. You can't even take drugs to alleviate it
mm,
because it's gone that far.
mm,
So yeah, I understand that. But again, suicide, as you said, is not a rational response
mm,
um, to stress or even impending death.
mm,
Um, yeah, it's it's not. And I've seen enough suicide in my life. Not
mm,
fortunate. Well, I've had one person in my family who uh, committed suicide. And for him, it was an act of rage.
mm.
Uh, it was a domestic issue that got out of hand, and he was arrested. And so basically, as you said, he took a T-shirt and made a loop around it and tied it around some cell bars and just dropped.
Oh, he was in
And,
jail when he died.
hmm hmm
Oh, so he was in jail
yeah.
for domestic violence, or?
Well,
Mhm,
he wasn't in. He was in like the
mhm,
local jail, not prison jail, but
mhm,
the local. He was just intoxicated, and he was just going to be put there for a couple of hours,
mhm,
a few hours till he sobered up. And he was so angry at this happening
mhm,
that he committed suicide while he was in the cell.
mhm. That's the number
Uh,
one cause of death in jail is suicide.
yeah.
Mhm,
In fact, I had an incident where this was not a family member, where during my police career, where a gentleman attempted suicide in the cell,
mhm,
and we had to cut him down.
mhm,
And this it was something because this guy fought us. He was really intent
mhm,
on committing this act.
mhm,
So I've seen it, and I've seen attempts on it of it up close
mhm,
during my police career. Yeah, and it's horrible because uh, there is always another way out.
mhm,
The old saying, "This too shall pass,"
mhm,
is true. I mean, that I can't say that necessarily for a terminally ill cancer patient,
mhm,
but um, killing yourself over
mhm,
a boyfriend or girlfriend leaving you, and that's what they said years ago, that suicide for some people is an act of revenge.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm.
yeah, and that's it's what I'll show you. Well, yeah,
Exactly.
you know what? Uh, People move on. You see, we've seen a lot of murder suicides lately,
Mm,
especially in this area.
mm,
A lot of murder suicides, and to the point where I think recently we had in the news here where a man killed his wife and his daughter before killing himself,
mm,
um, or tried to kill his daughter. His daughter didn't die, but um, it's horrendous,
Is that the one
and
where the daughter was going to visit and she didn't want to stay with the father or something? Is
it
that
could have been, could
right?
have been,
She was going
yeah.
to visit, but she didn't want to stay there, and he killed the mother and the daughter. I think I
Mhm.
just heard that in the news today.
Right,
Right.
yeah,
It's very recent. Like in Newton or something like that. Was it in Newton?
right down the road from here.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it was in Newton. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
from where
girl,
I am. Yeah.
yeah, I think she was around 15, and she didn't want to
Mm,
visit the father. He ended up killing the girl and the mother. Yeah. I just heard that in the news
yeah.
today. Yeah.
Sad.
Mhm,
It's sad, but
mhm,
like you said, it's imperative for all of us to be aware of the signs, because
mhm,
especially the sudden the sudden mood swings. And I think there was someone whom you knew. We talked about this about
Mhm.
maybe about 6, 7 months ago, where the person seemed to be so happy-go-lucky.
Oh yes, that was a friend of of Chevette's.
Right.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
and like he was the life of the party, and everybody was just really shocked when he killed himself because he was the last person that everyone had expected because he was always like the life of the party and just everyone
Mhm.
rotated around him and his was like a complete shock to everybody
Mhm.
because of that. Yeah.
Smokey Robinson says people think I'm the life of the party because I tell a joke or two.
Hmm.
Yeah, truly applies.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And in that situation, um, he killed himself over the ending of a relationship. And he
Mm.
killed himself either outside or in front of the building where the woman lived. So there's some revenge component to that. He killed himself in front of her building after she ended the relationship. So it was kind of like, see, well, I'll kind of show you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
that's sad. And and this happens a lot. I think a lot more to younger people with uh, relationship trauma
Mhm.
that these things happen,
Mhm.
and the one that we don't talk about too much, which is the um, uh, domestic issues between parents or parent stand-ins and younger children,
Mhm.
um, where they have to carry that burden.
Mhm.
Uh, and I've seen that where with uh, sexual abuse within the homes,
Mhm.
that type of thing, where the child feels nobody. And I had this happen in a school where I worked,
Mhm.
where this young 13-year-old girl was being sexually abused by the mother's boyfriend. And without getting into a lot of detail,
Mhm.
uh, she did what she thought getting to school was committing suicide in the school.
Mhm.
It was a failed attempt,
Mhm.
but when the mother came to the school, the mother fussed at the child
Mhm.
um, on the way out. And so that, to me, that means that the abuse had to be continued. But what are you going to do? And
Mhm.
this happens more than people want to admit that it happens.
Mhm.
And it's extremely prevalent and it's sad. And when you see, I had another young girl.
Mhm.
Uh, she was how old? 15, and her behavior just seemed like off the scale. And she was so angry at one point. She was a runaway that she punched a wall and broke her arm. That's how hard she hit the wall.
Mhm.
Uh, because she didn't want to go back to the father.
Mhm.
Well, the father was sexually abusing her.
Mhm.
And we didn't find this out until much, much later.
Mhm.
But that was why she kept running away from home. And no one wanted to pay attention to this young girl.
Wow.
Um, and she was 14, 15 years old.
Mhm.
And that's why I say that this goes on with our young people a little bit more than we are comfortable in admitting. And
Mhm.
when I see young girls, especially acting out, um,
Mhm.
one of the things that comes to my mind
Mhm.
is, are these, is there sexual abuse going on in the home?
That makes me wonder now about that case in Newton because the girl was 15 and they'd taken her to the father and she didn't want to be with the father. So then that's very suspicious now in that case.
Yeah.
And that makes me wonder. We have a question. Someone's asking about the nurse in LA, Nicole Linton, who killed, I forgot how many people, she killed several people after she floored her car to 130 miles per hour before a deadly car crash. They want to know, I believe that was a suicide attempt. Well, from my understanding, she did have a history of bipolar disorder, and I'm sure that probably played a factor in whatever happened with her. She could have either been in a very extreme manic episode, and in a manic episode, your judgment is impaired. You can have all kind of grandiose thoughts. you're just hyper verbal, hyperactive. So she could have either been in a manic phase or a depressive phase, but either one of those could have led to that happening. It's just like they killed 4 adults and a 1-year-old baby fetus. So the nurse, her name was Nicole Linton, that was in LA. So I don't know if you heard about that situation. Yeah. So she could have either, I mean, it could have been suicide from a depressive phase, or she could have been in a manic phase. She could have been either one, but I'm pretty sure whatever her mental health situation played a role in it. And I was wondering about Anne Heche. I understand that she had some drugs in the system, and so didn't she have some mental health history as well?
Well, I think so. Yes. And of course, now the investigation into her death has been terminated.
Oh, it has?
Yes, but the initial the initial finding was that she had drugs in her system which she should not have had. And so this was a case of someone who she might have been in a manic depressive state and exacerbated by drug use, and just made that decision that she was going to run into a house. And unfortunately, she caused a lot of damage, and her death wasn't as quick as she might have wanted it. It's just first of all, the whole suicide thing is really an irrational judgment for rational issues. But some people, when they are manic depressive or have some other serious evidence of mental decline, they are not thinking rationally anyway. They don't have the capability of making a rational decision about anything. And in their mind, that's the only option that they feel that they have. And so, but we have, and I go back to mood swings, because I've seen that, where someone is just so happy, so joyful, overly happy, really overly joyful. And you look at that and the next thing you know, they're gone. Yeah, it's sad. It's sad.
Someone commented a permanent fix for a temporary problem, but at the time, the person who's going through it, they're not seeing it as temporary. They're seeing no way out. They're like in this deep, deep, dark pit, as someone has described, and they're at the bottom of this deep pit, and they don't see a way out. So for them, it's not temporary, and they don't see any other solutions.
And that's where it's important for interventions.
Exactly.
That's where it's important for that. Yes.
Yeah. Here's some 5 steps that you can take to be the one to help someone in emotional pain. 5 steps. The first step is to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? It's not an easy question, but studies show that asking at-risk individuals if they're suicidal does not increase suicide or suicidal thoughts. So the first thing is to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? Second, keep them safe. So reduce that suicidal person's access to a highly lethal item or place is an important part of suicide prevention. While this is not always easy, asking if the at-risk person has a plan and removing the lethal means can make a difference. I remember once I had an inpatient and he was admitted because he was planning to shoot himself, but he ended up getting admitted to the hospital. And I told his wife to remove all the firearms. Oh my God, when he found out about that, he went off on me and made threats against me, even though the wife had removed the firearms from the house. And I have a current patient now who's very depressed, suicidal, had firearms. And I asked to have a relative to come and remove firearms from her home. This is a very real thing. I had another guy who was suicidal. I had his wife to remove the firearms. So it's something that I feel is very important to do, is to reduce the access. Because as I said, men are 8 times more likely to kill themselves with a firearm, and a woman's 35 times more likely to kill herself if there's a firearm in the house. And children too. I mean, by accident, you don't want, if the children have killed themselves too, just by the presence of firearms in the house. Number 3, be there. Listen carefully and acknowledge their feelings. So acknowledging their feelings and talking about suicide may reduce rather than increase suicidal thoughts. Number 4, help them connect. Save the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. They changed in July, and so now it's 988. And we repeat that again. The new National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is 988. So it's much easier than a longer number to remember. So much easier, 988. Number 5, the 5th thing to do is stay connected. Follow up and stay in touch after the crises. Studies have shown the number of suicide deaths go down when someone follows up with the at-risk person. So those steps are, number 1, ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? Number 2, keep them safe. Reduce access to the lethal items. Number 3, be there, which is listen carefully, acknowledge their feelings. Number 4, help them connect. That's what the National Suicide Prevention Line 988, or a professional, a physician, psychiatrist. And number 5, stay connected. Follow up and keep in touch after the crises. Mm-hmm. Those are things you can do to help somebody who's experiencing suicidal thoughts.
Yep, and that also, you can also access the suicide hotline online. So they have an online chat at 988lifeline.org.
Okay.
988lifeline.org.
Okay.
Lifeline is all one word, all connected, no breaks. 988lifeline.org. Because we know some of you don't want to use your phone. But and they had some other things that I hope I'm not going to be too repetitious, but some of the things that you mentioned on the CDC sites as far as suicide prevention is strengthen economic supports, strengthen access and delivery of suicide care, promote connectedness, you brought that up, teach coping and problem solving skills, especially with young people. I mean, some things just aren't the end of the world. And identify and support people at risk. That's for those of us, and I think that you mentioned those. They call it gatekeeper training and crisis intervention, and social and emotional learning programs, parenting skill and family relationship programs. I think that family relationship programs really needs to be looked into, especially if you have teenage children. They are so malleable at that time, and with hormones going everywhere, and but the right place, and thoughts shooting out here from here or there, and young people tend to have a feeling of desperation over what we look at as being minor things. Self-esteem, which now they've trying to get children to avoid TikTok because of all the self-esteem issues encountered on that, and which would lead to attempted suicides, more and more attempted suicides by younger people in that 10 to 14 years of age category.
So it's with TikTok, Snapchat. What's I've never done any of
those. Yeah, there's a new one out there now, and I can't remember the name, but yeah, they're out there.
Because there's the pressures to fit in, to be a certain size, to look a certain way, all the bullying that goes on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's the worst kind of bullying because uh, when the children, and I was watching a kid today walking to high school,
Mhm.
and he's walking to high school. He's he's got his cell phone out, and he's just texting away. And these, I looked at that and I said, these kids can't walk without texting. Uh, and what would they have? They would have been so out of place
Mhm.
20, 30 years ago.
Mhm.
If we weren't walking with our what we used to call our walkie,
Mhm.
which is a good friend, or we might have earphones in our ears listening to music, but this over communication, and I think there's a term called overstimulation
Mhm. Mhm.
of young minds is I think part of one of the root reasons for the increase in suicides among younger people.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And older people, you know, I see a thing here about up a comment about hopelessness.
Mhm.
Um, the what is that? The empty nest syndrome. I
Oh, yeah.
imagine.
Mhm.
I think that can be a contributing factor, and uh, just the whole process of getting old and being and being aware of uh, those the plagues of
Oh,
agedness.
I think
know?
that's very
Yeah,
important. The aging, like in the past, you used to be able to party all night and things like that. But now, if you do, you pay for it the next day. I can say that firsthand.
yeah, yeah.
You
The
pay for
late,
it the
the
next
late,
day for several days after.
yeah, the late great Betty Davis once said, "Getting old is not for sissies."
Oh, that's
And
what she
and
said.
and yeah, it's she said on the Johnny Carson show.
Hmm.
Uh, but it's true. And
Mhm.
again, it's almost as if we get older, but we become adolescent in our thinking.
Mhm.
And for some people, especially men, the how can I put this discreetly? But the that you when you're no longer uh, you have a lowering of your sexual prowess, so to speak.
Mhm. Mhm.
And for some men, for whom that is their identity,
Mhm.
that's devastating.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's devastating. The same thing with women going through, and I know that this is a factor, going through the changes that your body going through
Mhm.
um, uh,
Menopause.
after
Mhm.
menopause
Mhm.
can be devastating for
Mhm.
some. Um, and I think uh, there can be a lot of deep depression associated with that.
Mhm.
So
Especially if you've tied your self-worth to how you look, your weight, or whatever. For those, I mean, it's really devastating because a lot of women, tie their self-worth into how they look, but it's not just the women, it's like their partners in society, how they see, the judge women based on their looks, their age, their attractiveness. And so it's a societal thing, a personal thing, a relationship thing, where for women, I mean, it's a big thing, compared to say men. And that's why women will go out and get all kinds of, butt lifts and plastic surgery,
yeah,
whatever, to try and Botox and, whatever they,
and you do more damage by
yeah.
by running away from your age
Hmm.
than embracing your age. Just
Exactly.
embrace it.
Exactly.
Uh, if
Yes.
those around you don't want to, uh, cut them loose to other people. Uh, One of the things, and I'll try to be quick with this, is I belong to a senior center here,
Mm,
and when we had COVID, the senior center shut down
mm,
and shut down basically. But what they found out is that people were going through anxiety
mhm,
and depression because they miss coming in and having a connection with other people.
mhm, mhm,
And so what they did is they instituted an exercise program where we would exercise outside.
mhm,
And it wasn't just for the exercise. It was because the people were able to once again get together. They were able to talk to other people, to talk to their peers, have peers to talk to and to communicate with. And that is, that's also important, which goes back to something that you said, and the CDC says, about maintaining connectivity, not letting people feel isolated.
Yeah, because by nature, we're created to be social beings and interact. And that was one of the most devastating parts of the pandemic for everyone, for children, for adults, is the isolation, the social isolation. That was the most, I think, devastating impact that the COVID pandemic had, the social isolation.
We are a touchy-feeling being, touchy-feely being. Yes, unlike other animals, we love that, and once that is taken away from us, it's a serious adjustment. Serious adjustment.
I mean, they did those experiments, like with the children or the monkeys who didn't have touch and whatever, and just from early on, it affected their physical and psychological functioning, not having that physical touch of a caring mother. So touch is very important. I know that's why in some of the orphanages or whatever, they have people who come in to hold the babies, and so they can have that physical contact so that they can develop normally.
Yes, indeed. So we covered a lot of hope there. I hope that we hit a lot of people to pay attention to the warning signs and the not only the warning signs that for other people and themselves, but also the need to the steps you can take to intervene.
Right, and don't be afraid, because people, a lot of myths people have. Well, if I ask suicide, I'll put the idea in your head, but you're not putting the idea in your head, because the idea is there, and you're helping them to be able to express it and maybe think about other options, other alternatives other than suicide. So no, don't be afraid to ask someone about suicide. You're not planting that idea in their head; it's already there.
And if you're beginning to feel you yourself are feeling to being isolated, and try to go out, reach out, and seek new friends, or new acquaintances. No one should be isolated. An isolated mind is just not a healthy thing for a lot of different reasons, and it puts you in a situation where you actually depress yourself into death. It's kind of hard to explain, but you become you fade into that melancholy, which is like a slow eating away at you, and then you wonder, how did this happen? It looks to other people like a natural death, but it is not. It's just that we all need to be have a need to be loved, to be wanted, and a feeling of being listened to and heard. And I want to make a difference. It's not being heard; it's being listened to, which are two different things.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's being listened to. So, and that's one of the steps that even with in suicide prevention is just to get people to talk. And as you said earlier, to acknowledgement, sincere acknowledgement. Wow, I understand how you're feeling. Let's talk about how you're feeling, and let's work together and see if we can work something out and work a way around this issue that you have. And that allows you to sometimes get into the root issue of what it may be. They may be saying one thing initially, but it could be something a little bit deeper that really is the issue.
I want to talk about touch is important too, just like a hug. A hug increases the endorphins of the person that you're hugging. Your body's natural feel-good chemicals. So a hug is therapeutic. Yeah.
Those
we were taught in psychiatry, that you don't touch your patients or whatever. I'm doing, virtual now, but there are times when, it's very appropriate to hug a patient. It's therapeutic.
Yeah, I think it's
Mhm,
on two levels, because I know we're going to get away from suicide, but
mhm,
we my mother-in-law was terminally ill,
mhm,
and it was odd because I had to get my father-in-law just to touch his wife, while
mhm,
she
mhm,
wasn't communicative, but
mhm,
just to touch, and it made a difference.
mhm,
It
mhm,
made a difference.
mhm,
So I can see where even with um, people who are going through crises,
mhm,
uh, where uh, just that human touch, that
mhm,
hug, and
mhm,
we're talking about the neighborly hug. We're not talking about the kind of hug that you hug with your 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 sweetheart, but
right.
a
Human touch.
hug.
You're talking about human touch,
Yes,
right? Just
correct.
yeah,
Um, yeah, different kind of hug,
yeah,
and it works. It
yeah.
works.
Mhm,
Sometimes that's the catalyst for an emotional release,
mhm,
especially when you get. And I think it's good. Sometimes when people cry,
mhm,
uh,
mhm,
I think it's. Uh, I think it's a good thing, and I think that uh, I had to relate this to some men that I know recently. That
oh, yeah, especially
uh,
for men. Yeah.
yeah, that you're holding on to something
Mhm,
that isn't healthy.
mhm,
It's an crying is a natural response to tragedy, disappointment, whatever. And if you hold it and
mhm,
fight it, it comes out in other ways.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Wow. Boy, this has been a very powerful show. So we do hope that we've reached out to people and that you've been helped by what we've said today, and just realize that there's always, always, always hope. It may not seem like it, but I remember this poster I had in college. It said, "If you get to the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on." I remember the poster. I said, "Tie a knot and hang on." So that's what we want you to do: tie a knot and hang on.
Absolutely. As I said, this too will change. This will pass. You just wait long enough, it'll pass.
Yes, yes,
Yeah. There's joy behind every cloud.
yes. So we
It's
thank
just, yeah.
everyone for tuning in, and this has been an awesome show. Thank you, Norm, and we look forward to interacting with you in 2 weeks, which will be, I think, the 28th at 6 p.m.
Yes.
for another Mind Matters episode where we speak life into the community. So we thank you for participating, and you have a wonderful and blessed rest of the week. You have any parting words, Norm?
No, except take care of yourself.
Good night, everyone.